You've been following the rules your entire life, and the breakthrough still hasn't come. Every protocol, every proper channel, every right way to approach God, you've tried them all. And by the end of this, you'll understand why the woman who broke every single one of them walked away healed, while the rule followers stood watching. She'd been bleeding for 12 years. Mark chapter 5 gives us the details. And they're brutal. 12 years of hemorrhaging. 12 years of being declared ceremonially unclean under Levitical law. That meant she couldn't enter the temple. Couldn't touch another person without making them unclean too. Couldn't sit on furniture others would use. For over a decade, this woman lived in enforced isolation, quarantined by her own body and her own religion simultaneously. Think about what 12 years does to a person. You age. You watch friends stop visiting. You spend everything you have on doctors who take your money and leave you worse than before. Mark 5:26 says it plainly. She had suffered many things of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was nothing bettered, but rather grew worse. She was broke, sicker, and running out of reasons to keep hoping. That's the soil where desperate faith grows. See? Comfortable faith follows procedure. Comfortable faith waits in line, fills out the form, schedules the appointment. Comfortable faith is polite, and there's a place for that. God honors order and reverence. But something shifts when you've exhausted every proper channel and the bleeding won't stop. When the system designed to connect you to God has become the wall between you and Him. She heard Jesus was passing through, and she made a decision that violated everything her culture told her was acceptable. An unclean woman pushing through a crowd of clean people. Every shoulder she brushed, every robe she grazed, she was technically contaminating. The law was clear in Leviticus 15. Anyone who touched her became unclean until evening. She was walking through that crowd like a living contagion, and she knew it. So why did she do it? Because 12 years of doing things the right way had produced exactly nothing. This is where her story becomes yours. You've been praying the proper prayers, attending the right services, reading the devotionals, tithing, volunteering, doing everything the Christian checklist says you should do, and the wound is still open. The marriage is still fractured. The addiction still has its grip. The depression still settles in every morning before your feet hit the floor. The bleeding woman teaches us something the religious establishment of her day couldn't stomach. Sometimes the protocol is the obstacle. The Pharisees had built such an elaborate system of rules around God's presence that the people who needed Him most were the ones least able to reach Him. The unclean, the broken, the ones bleeding out. Jesus was on His way to heal Jairus' daughter, a synagogue leader's child. A respectable request from a respectable man through respectable channels. That was the scheduled appointment. The bleeding woman crashed it. She didn't ask permission. She didn't send a representative. She didn't wait for the appropriate moment. She reached through a wall of bodies and grabbed the hem of His garment. One touch. That's all she took. And Jesus stopped in the middle of an emergency house call for a dying girl, surrounded by a pressing crowd. He stopped and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" The disciples thought he'd lost his mind. Mark 5:31. You see the people crowding against you, and yet you can say, "Who touched me?" Dozens of people were physically touching him in that crush of bodies, but only one touch carried desperation behind it. Only one touch was an act of faith so raw it pulled power out of him, without his conscious decision to release it. The Greek word mark uses is dunamis, the same word used for miracles. She drew a miracle out of Christ through sheer desperation married to belief. Here's what strikes me about that moment. Jesus felt the difference between a crowd pressing against him and one woman reaching for him. 100 people were closer. 100 people had better access, cleaner hands, more social standing. The synagogue leader had a formal invitation. She had nothing, broke, sick, unclean, uninvited, and her touch was the one that moved heaven. Your polished prayers might be the crowd pressing. Pleasant, expected, part of the normal traffic around Jesus. But that midnight cry when you're on the bathroom floor and the words aren't even coherent anymore, that's the hem grab. That's the touch he stops for. She fell at his feet, trembling. Mark 5:33 says she told him the whole truth, every detail. 12 years of blood, poverty, isolation, shame. She confessed it all at his feet in front of everyone, and in doing so, she broke another protocol. A woman publicly addressing a rabbi, an unclean person admitting she'd just contaminated a holy man. She stacked violation on top of violation, and his response demolished every religious framework that would have condemned her. "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Mark 5:34. He called her daughter. In a culture that had treated her as a contaminant for 12 years, he called her family. He didn't rebuke the protocol violation. He celebrated it as faith. Now, and this matters, desperate faith can become an excuse for recklessness if you miss the core of what happened here. Critics within the faith rightly point out that God establishes order for a reason. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 14:40 that all things should be done decently and in order. The Levitical purity laws existed to protect the community and point toward holiness. They were God's own design. The bleeding woman didn't reject God's authority. She bypassed a system that had calcified into a barrier between her and the God the system was supposed to serve. The distinction is everything. She broke human religious protocol to reach the divine person behind it. Her desperation didn't drive her away from God. It drove her through every obstacle between her and God. That's the kind of faith that scares religious people, because it can't be controlled, scheduled, or approved by committee. It doesn't wait for the worship team to play the right song. It doesn't need the pastor's permission. It lunges. And Jesus honors the lunge every single time. You might be in year 12 of your own bleeding. Maybe it's a prayer you've prayed so many times the words taste stale. Maybe you've started to believe that God heals other people, the ones with better testimonies, cleaner histories, louder worship voices. Maybe you've quietly concluded that the proper channels just don't work for someone like you. The hem is still within reach, but reaching for it costs something. It cost her dignity, crawling through a crowd on the ground. It cost her reputation. Everyone would know an unclean woman had been among them. It cost her the last shred of religious respectability she might have clung to. Desperate faith is expensive. It spends whatever it has left on one chance at contact with Jesus. James 4:8 promises, "Draw near to God, and He will draw near to you." The verse doesn't specify which door to use. It doesn't require a membership card. It says draw near, however you can. Whatever it takes, crawl if you have to. The woman's healing was instant. 12 years of medical failure, resolved in a second of contact. But notice, she'd been walking toward that moment for a long time. Hearing about Jesus, building the courage, talking herself into it, and probably out of it a dozen times, fighting through a crowd with a body weakened by over a decade of hemorrhaging. The miracle was instant. The journey to the miracle was grueling. Your breakthrough might look sudden to everyone watching. They'll see the moment everything changed. They won't see the 12 years of crawling that brought you close enough to reach. So stop waiting for the proper channel to open. Stop rehearsing the perfect prayer. Stop believing you need to get clean before you can touch the one who makes you clean. That's the theology of the Pharisees, and Jesus dismantled it in front of a crowd. That day, you don't get healed and then come to Jesus. You come to Jesus, bleeding, broke, desperate, rule-breaking, trembling. And He calls you daughter, He calls you son. The crowd that day was full of people who were close to Jesus and touched nothing. She was far from Him, socially, religiously, physically pushed to the margins, and she touched everything. Proximity without desperation is just geography. Distance with desperation becomes a miracle. Your 12 years have not been wasted. They've been burning away every option except the right one. Every failed doctor, every empty remedy, every protocol that produced nothing. They were all leading you to the same place she arrived. The end of yourself, the beginning of a reach so desperate it pulls heaven down. The hem is right there. Stop being polite about it.